Hello, this is Peter Falk, and you're listening to the Columbo Files on the Ludic Lounge, hosted by Antonicus Maximus and John Soares. Welcome back to the Columbo Files. We are here with another file for you fine listeners. I am your wonderful co-host, John Soares. And with me, as always, is the man, the myth, the booty, the legend himself, Antonicus Gluteus Maximus IV. Bit of fun, a fond hello to the listeners, Anthony.
A fond hello to the listeners at home.
Oh, you almost turned into Orson Welles there for a minute. I like it.
I need to go way deeper for Orson Welles, though.
We here at Remote Farm, where Mrs. Buckley lives, are doing that famous pea commercial, the split piece.
Yes, that's exactly what you're doing. Jesus. Hi, everybody. Welcome.
That's the kind of show you're going to be in for this week, everybody. Anthony, we got the season 1 closer here, 1972's Blueprint for Murder. Now, Anthony, when I say Blueprint for Murder, what does that make you think?
I think that, to me, a blueprint for murder makes me think it has something to do with a construction site, John.
And boy, howdy, Anthony, are you right? We got a lot of shoe leather and a construction site. A lot of 70s men who have no shirts.
Manly men.
Manly men doing manly men things on a construction site. Smoking a pipe while on a construction site.
I'm pretty sure Columbo got a fine PhD of, architecture by the time this episode ended.
I mean, if he didn't have a PhD in it already, I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case for Columbo. But we have a pretty stacked cast here this week, Anthony.
Boy, do we ever.
Yeah, boy.
So, ladies, gentlemen, and fine gentlefolk of all, we have a small cast of characters. However, their work is anything but small. So I'm going to try to blow through this. And again, these are just the regular things that I think of that I added. So a lot of these folks, just like Mr. Patrick O'Neal as Elliot Markham, has a whole lot of work dating all the way back to 1951, John.
Wow. I have his film career starting in about 54. So it looks like he was doing some stuff on TV in the early 50s, right?
Oh boy, was he ever, John. He was in Dick and the Duchess as Dick Duchess from 57 to 58. He was in From the Terrace as Dr. Jim Roper in the year 1960. He was in Diagnosis Unknown as Dr. Daniel Coffey in the year 1960. The Twilight Zone, Route 66, The Defender, The Outer Limits, Matchless as Perry Matchless Liston in the year 1967. And John, he was in the cult classic horror film Silent Night, Bloody Night.
He also did some films, Anthony, in addition to some of the TV work you mentioned. He starred in the comedy about the Northeastern Blackout of 1965, which took out power across 7 different states, which, funny enough, is directed by a former director of a Columbo episode, Anthony, Hy Averback. 1968 classic, Where Were You When the Lights Went Out? He also starred in a John Huston movie. John Huston, legendary director, father of actress Angelica Houston.
Oh.
Talked like this. Hello, Mr. Gitz.
Okay.
I only mentioned that because I just finished listening to a book about Chinatown, and he's in Chinatown. That movie by Huston is a neo-noir espionage thriller from 1970 called The Kremlin Letter. And Mr. O'Neal was also in the original adaptation of The Stepford Wives, Anthony, in
as
1974.
Dale Koba.
That is right. That is based off of a Ira Levin novel, which, coincidentally, Ira Levin is also the guy who wrote Rosemary's Baby.
Oh, fun fact.
He was also in the Steven Seagal classic, 1992's Under Siege.
As Captain Adams.
That's correct. In addition, did you mention that he was in The Outer Limits, Anthony?
I did mention that, John.
Okay. He was also in Murder, She Wrote.
Of course.
The Streets of San Francisco.
Now, John, was Mr. Patrick O'Neal wearing a flower in his hair?
No, again, as we previously established, it was Michael Douglas.
Okay, fair enough.
And wasn't it Carl Malden? Isn't Carl Malden in that?
we'll roll with it. That's fine.
I know I'm right.
Yeah.
Listeners, if I'm wrong, please correct me. We like to hear from people.
John, did you also know that Patrick O'Neal was in Barnaby Jones? He was in Perry Mason Returns, as well as finishing his career with Perry Mason, The Case of the Skin Deep Scandal, playing his role, revising his role as Arthur Westbrook.
I guess they brought Perry Mason back as a bunch of TV movies later on. So Perry Mason's just a TV staple at this point.
Pretty much.
I mean, that's why it's on HBO Max. Well, the new show anyway, but I digress.
Oh, I didn't know they did another reboot of it.
Yeah, it's basically young PI Perry Mason before he becomes a lawyer, I guess. It's like apparently it's the novels that Perry Mason is based on. The very early ones, he's very much a Philip Marlowe-esque private eye.
Yeah, I remember the episodes I watched of Perry Mason were like the early serials from like the 40s or early 50s where he was a PI essentially. Yeah,
and this is essentially this is a period piece that follows him during those days. And it stars, I think his name is Matthew Rhys. He was the lead guy in that FX show, The Americans, opposite Kerry Russell, who I believe he's actually now married to.
Well, John, speaking of The Americans, we have a Mr. Forrest Tucker playing Bo Williamson as one Southern Texan of an American in this week's episode.
Boy, if you needed to pick out a Texan, I think it'd be a little hard pressed to find a Texan in this episode, Anthony.
Oh, yeah, right, absolutely. But speaking of Mr. Forrest Tucker, again, a lot of work, ladies and fine gentle folk at home listening. A lot of work. He never starved. He started all the way back in 1940.
He started actually as a vaudeville straight man, Anthony.
Oh.
So for those of you at home, vaudeville was a live comedy performance that prefaced a lot of modern comedy, both in TV and in film. That's just based off the top of my head. I might be somewhat incorrect, but a lot of vaudeville actors ended up, going to the stage, going to like Broadway or doing film stuff. Vaudeville is a lot like the Three Stooges. I
was gonna say Bob Hope, a lot of that kind of a comedy. Essentially, it's slightly over dramatic kind of antics, comedy, stuff of that nature.
Simple humor, very physical humor, but it's always played opposite a straight man. So not Bo Williams. So Forrest Tucker was that guy.
Now, John, just so the audience at home is listening, when we refer to them as straight men, we're not talking about their sexuality as heterosexual.
No.
We're talking about their standing as far as they were not the ones of immediately over the top, over dramatic comedy. They were typically your stereotypical John Does that would stand there and have the comedy thrown at them.
They are the reactions to the joke maker, and they make the joke funnier.
Yes.
To be straightforward about it. He was also a sight reader, Anthony. You could hand him a bunch of pages for a scene. He would read it and be ready to go, one take only.
Wow. That is impressive.
He is also was able to dispel a Hollywood perception that blonde men were not photogenic on film.
I didn't know that was a misconception.
Me neither. I mean, we live in a world that has Brad Pitt, so I don't understand why that was ever a thing. He was also 6'5". He's a big boy.
He looked it, man, in this episode. Let me tell you, big old boy. But John, I mentioned that he started back in 1940 and that he never starved. So let me give you a list of just some of the stuff. Again, fine folk at home. This is just stuff I cut out because I found interesting and some things that I could decipher. But this man's IMDb page is probably one of the bigger IMDb pages I've ever seen. He starred in Honolulu as Barney back in the year 1941. He starred as Private First Classman Al Thomas in Sands of Iwo Jima in 1949. He starred as Wild Bill Hickok in 1953 in the movie The Pony Express. He was in Crunch and Des as Crunch Adams from the year 1955-56. He was in an episode or two of Climax, The Strange World of Planet X, playing Gil Graham in the year 1958. He was in Wagon Train, Rawhide, Burke's Law, The Virginian, F Troop as Sergeant Morgan O'Rourke from 1965 to 67, Bonanza, Gunsmoke, Dusty's Trail as Mr. Callahan in the mid-70s, starting in Little House in the Prairie for an episode or two, The Ghostbusters, and fun fact about this TV show, The Ghostbusters, John.
There's a TV show?
Yes, there was a 1975 to 70 or 70 mid 70s TV show called The Ghostbusters. Now, when the 1980s film starring Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, etc., were going to actually, when they were trying to find a title for their movie, they thought Ghostbusters, and it just worked and flowed with everything. However, they had to get the rights from these fine folk of the TV show, and it was a huge to-do. So in the movie of the Ghostbusters, they had to film several scenes duplicate times just in case they couldn't get the rights. So a lot of times when you see like the sign Ghostbusters in the movie The Ghostbusters or anything like that, they would have to film that particular scene twice, one with the Ghostbusters name if they got the rights, and the second one with the title of the movie, which I can't remember what it was going to be.
Not Ghostbusters.
Yeah, it's essentially not Ghostbusters. This is credit to the Netflix series, documentary series, The Movies That Made Us, when they were talking about this particular topic. So that's why I included this TV show in his page here, John.
Interesting.
And he played Kong in that Ghostbusters TV show. And he also starred in episodes of Kojak, The Bionic Woman, Fantasy Island, The Love Boat, Murder, She Wrote, and Thunder Road as Charlie Morrison in 1986, and 1987 cult classic Time Stalkers as Texas John Cody. John.
For those of you at home, he did a lot of Western and action movies.
Yes, he did.
And then eventually did do some pivot to comedy and some stage musicals. He was also served in the Second World War.
I believe that.
Yeah, and you covered basically everything I have. I had to keep Mr. Tucker's list a little short because, boy, he kept it big, just like a Texan would, and I don't even think he's from Texas.
Probably not, John.
Probably not.
But now let's move on to one of the wives of Mr. Bo Williams, the ex-wife, Goldie Williamson, played by Janis Paige, John.
Janis Paige, still alive, but is now retired from acting, Anthony. Some early stuff about her career. After she graduated from high school, she was hired at the Los Angeles club, the Hollywood Canteen, during the Second World War. Now, the Canteen, Anthony, is an interesting place because it was a studio-sponsored club for U.S. servicemen. So she was performing there as a singer and a dancer and was chosen by some of the Air Force pilots who flew a very specific plane, the P-61 Black Widow. She was chosen as the Black Widow girl and posed as a pinup model for those pilots as appreciation of their selection. Because of her career at the Canteen, she was signed by a Warner Brothers representative to a Warner Brothers film contract. She was found there by this, representative, and he liked her so much and liked her moxie that put her to a contract. She starred in a number of musicals. One of her films also, she was the co-star in, I should say, the co-star in Doris Day's film debut.
Oh, I'll be.
Yes. But eventually she left Hollywood in 1951. The reasoning for that was that she felt like she didn't fit in on the Hollywood side, in the Hollywood scene, so she moved on to Broadway. And her stardom came on Broadway by doing the role of Babe in a play called The Pajama Game, which the name sounds odd, but it is about labor troubles happening at a pajama factory.
Oh, okay.
Not what you were thinking, huh?
Not at all. Not at all, John.
She went back to Hollywood somewhere in the mid-50s. I have here 1957 was one of her big films, a movie called Silk Stockings with Fred Astaire and Sid Charisse.
So there's a lot of dancing.
A lot of dancing. And in 1960, she starred in the Doris Day David Niven comedy, Please Don't Eat the Daisies.
Oh, and always a word of the wise regarding.
Yeah, I mean, I learned that back in 52, but, sometimes you have to remind
people. You learned it sooner than me, John. I learned it in Nam.
I know, yeah. I mean, you had a hell of a time with it, to be honest. But in 1961, she starred in another comedy as a love-starved neighbor in Bachelor in Paradise with, I don't know if you know this guy, Anthony, but she starred with Bob Hope, everybody, Bob Hope.
Jesus Christ, I knew this was coming.
No, but I understand your confusion.
Thank you, sir. And speaking of the year 1961, John, she starred in an episode of The Wagon Train, She also starred in many other sitcoms in the 60s, including Burke's Law, The Fugitive, Mr. Soares' favorite show, Mannix.
I have a fun fact about Mannix.
Please.
Also co-created by Richard Levinson.
Of course it was, John.
And I think William Link as well. So that's why Mannix, my dad connected Mannix to Columbo. Almost the same freaking people.
Boy, howdy. She was also in the Mary Tyler Moore Show, John.
That's right.
She was also in The Love Boat, Alice, Hawaii Five-0, Charlie's Angels, The Rockford Files, Fantasy Island, the movie Gunshy as Nettie McCoy in 1983. Also starred in Baby Makes 5 as Blanche Riddle in 1983 as well. She starred in an episode of Night Court, John. Do you remember Night Court, John?
I remember Night Court, Anthony.
Boy,
that's lawyering in court at night.
Absolutely. She starred in this episode as Eleanor Brandon in the year 1984. And she starred in Trapper John M.D. as Catherine Hackett in that series from 85 to 86. And finishing off her career on an episode of Family Law in 2001.
She also, did you mention that she had parts in 8 is Enough, Happy Days, and Saint Elsewhere?
No, I did not, John. Way to include that and pick up my slack.
That's it. I mean, that's what we're here for. And we one person's slack is the other person's treasure. She also had a TV starring turn. It was only one season, but I only mentioned it because she was the lead in this show. TV sitcom It's Always Jan as the lead Jan.
Oh.
I believe this was sometime in the 50s. I don't have the exact date listed here, but she did lead her own show at one point.
Well, I did not know that.
That's correct. Now, Anthony, I think it's time to move on to the second Mrs. Williamson, Jennifer Williamson, who is played by actress Pamela Austin. Now, her resume isn't as, I would say, robust as our previous actors and actress, but she is in some notable film and TV stuff. She appeared in 2 Elvis movies, Anthony. And
absolutely.
By Elvis,
Blue Hawaii.
Blue Hawaii and Kissing Cousins.
Well, I just wanted to mention Blue Hawaii because I don't want to talk about Kissing Cousins. But Blue Hawaii, John, she played Selena, a.k.a. Sandy Emerson, in the year 1961. And fun fact about Blue Hawaii, John.
Yes, Anthony.
It was, I believe, and I didn't look this up, which I probably should have for the loyal listeners at home. So please correct me, loyal listeners, if I am incorrect. This was the first appearance of Elvis's hit song and my wedding song, Can't Help Falling in Love.
Yeah, no, I can't find shit.
Yeah, so just trust me on that. Loyal listeners, trust me.
We'll correct ourselves later on. I learned a thing about Miss Austin, Anthony.
Did you?
I did.
Just one thing?
Oh, just a couple of things, actually. They bothered me. I'm sorry. Just like this impression bothers people. I'm sorry. I just have to do it. Most of her notoriety came from advertising, Anthony. Do you want to know why that's the case?
I do want to know why, John.
Anthony, she was the Dodge Rebellion girl for Dodge Automobiles from 1965 to 1967. The Dodge Rebellion campaign was a very successful ad campaign where Pamela Austin played a damsel in distress and then would say a famous catchphrase that I don't have in front of me, but I'm going to vamp while I do.
Well, John, while you're doing that, I will also mention that she was starred in an episode of Wagon Train, The Fugitive, The Twilight Show, The Bing Crosby Show.
Bing Crosby,
everybody.
Bing Crosby, I'm here to give everybody some nice Florida oranges.
She also starred in an episode in 1966 of The Wild Wild West as Priscilla Ames, and she also starred in The Virginian.
That is correct. Now, Anthony, I'm going to read this like Bing Crosby because I want to give everybody a pack of oranges and a Dodge Rebellion because her catchphrase, ladies and gentlemen, and everybody in between, is that at the end of each Dodge Rebellion commercial, she would be rescued and say, "The Dodge Rebellion wants you."
That's it?
That's it. So she would be a damsel in distress and be menaced by sharks or falling off a drawbridge, falling off a roof, being thrown out of a cargo plane. Something would save her. Whoever would save her, they would be in a Dodge Rebellion, and the tagline would end, "The Dodge Rebellion wants you." And she did that from 65 to 67. It was so popular, it led to a TV Guide profile of her. And by 68, Dodge executives were so concerned that she was overshadowing the cars, they fired her, replaced the Dodge Rebellion with a new car, and created a whole new ad campaign without her and added a new model.
Wowza.
Kind of crazy, right?
That is an excellent fun fact, John.
Yes, indeedy. Now, Anthony, I think that's the end of our cast list, unless you have anybody else you'd like to talk about.
No, John, but one fun fact I'd like to add, as we're going to go into the people who wrote, directed, and scored this episode, is
that's correct.
Our man, our Columbo, our trench coat wielding, lovable detective himself directed this episode, John.
That is right. Peter Falk finally gets his wish to direct. And boy, there's probably a reason he never did another episode directing again.
Come on, John.
No, there's a little bit more tidbits about that. We're going to save in-depth talk about Peter Falk for our next episode. So just to give our good listeners a little breakdown of what's coming up for the rest of this month. Next episode will be a retrospective on Peter Falk. We will do a fairly somewhat in-depth discussion on his career and other stuff that he did and stuff that we haven't seen, even though we are big fans, and stuff that we do love him in besides Columbo. And then the following week after that, we will do our season 1 retrospective ranking and go from there. So, Anthony, we've alluded to the fact that Peter Falk has walked off set a couple times in previous episodes because he demanded the opportunity to film. He was bugging Levinson and Link and the studio to direct. And it was such a rare occurrence that they had no idea how to really handle it.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. They kept resisting until he walked off set. Again, this is all from IMDb trivia and gleaned from stuff from the Columbo File, but both don't really go into the specifics on where Falk walks off set. Well, we know the reason why. He wants to direct. They're not going to let him. According to IMDb and Columbo File, this particular script was given to Peter Falk because it had complicated location shoots, which even the most skilled director would have trouble with. One of the things that made filming very difficult, if nearly impossible, is that the construction site that they filmed at was always changing because it's a construction site. It's not. They're not going to hold off until for 6 weeks. They have a schedule to keep and money to uphold. So because the changing in locations made it difficult to film, reshoots were almost impossible. And a majority of this episode takes place around this construction site. Another fun fact, Peter Falk consulted with some famous people on this episode, Anthony, about how he should direct.
Did he really?
Yes, he connected with old pal of the show, Steven Spielberg.
I was going to say, did he connect with Spielberg? Oh,
yep, he connected with Spielberg, and he also connected with good personal friend of his, and also very noted director and actor. And it's important for our first episode of season 2 because this actor is the guest star of that particular episode, John Cassavetes.
Oh.
For those of you at home, Cassavetes is a very noted director himself, and also starred, if I recall correctly, in Rosemary's Baby as the husband character who's named.
Yeah, I believe that is the case. Yeah. I think that's where I know him from. That's the picture I have in my mind.
So, needless to say, Peter Falk had a little bit of an uphill battle that was seemingly put in front of him on purpose.
Yeah, and
to shut him up.
Very unfortunate, because I would have loved to see what would have happened if he was given just a stereotypical Columbo episode where it's only maybe 1 to 2 locations tops. Because this was his only directing credit on the whole show, John.
Yeah, and 69 episodes, only one of them is his. Granted, the previous 6 we've had so far already had. Yeah, and you open the show with Steven Spielberg, even though Spielberg is not who he will become at the onset of the show. He's very much on that path and very certain on how his style is going to be presented. So I think it's a little, unfortunately, it's very unfair to Peter, and I think he's got some strong bones here, to be honest. We could talk about it a little bit as it comes up, but we have two returning faces for the rest of our crew, Anthony.
Yes, we do, John. We are graced with the score by Gil Malel. I always butcher his name, and John corrects me. Thank you. And the episode is also written by Stephen Bochco.
Stephen Bochco making another return to the page here. And on that note, Anthony, I think I've exhausted everything on the casting crew. Do you have just one more thing?
I do. Just the episode description that I always love to give the loyal listeners at home. The episode description via the episode description on the DVD. And in this week's episode, Columbo excavates the area surrounding a building's newly poured foundation to locate a corpse in the Stephen Bochco penned episode.
Let's start rolling.
So the episode opens, John, with a man weaving through traffic in a fancy, looks like a Cadillac car to get into a building extremely quickly.
That is a caddy, and it is a very explosive opening because it just jumps straight into this car, just cutting somebody off in order to park at a building. And then we see some very aggressive shoe leather.
Very aggressive. And then the camera pans, and we get a cowboy-looking Texan, Mr. Williamson, with an ascot, John.
Oh, but I got to say, that hat is something. Like, they wanted to lean into what people think a Texan would look like.
And you know what? They did a pretty darn good job because he's got like a 35-gallon hat on. But the ascot I'm picking that out because normally you see like a bolo tie maybe or a stereotypical.
Yeah.
An ascot was odd to me.
I would chalk it up to 70s fashion.
Yeah, fair enough.
That's my personal thought. Now, this gentleman, we learn his name is Mr. Williamson.
Yes,
he's looking for a guy named Markham. It looks like he walks into the building he walked into. Looks to be some kind of office space, and he walks into this office, presumably this Markham person, and he sees this model city. And if I recall, we see a plaque saying Williamson City.
That we do, John, but you're missing the part where he just about kicks down the office door, blows past the secretary, looking for Markham, and then finds himself glancing upon this model of Williamson City.
Which he's not pleased about whatsoever.
No, the secretary, though, is, and she is just gleaming over Mr. Markham and his brilliance in the architectural skill building this. And as she's doing that, John, what happens to Mr. Williams?
He goes Hulk smash.
Absolutely, and he just clobbers the whole you-know-what out of this model city.
Absolutely. And he leaves. We cut to a construction site. And Anthony, this is a special moment because I'm going to pitch who I think should have been Elliot Markham. Because the moment I saw Patrick O'Neal, I immediately thought, damn, this should have been Leslie Nielsen.
You know what? I agree with you, John. You were talking about you were going to surprise me with this in pre-prep. And you know what? I agree. I think he would have been a really good bad guy for this episode.
And I think if we could talk about the chemistry between Patrick O'Neal and Peter Falk here, I kind of feel like O'Neal, and this is one of two Columbo episodes, so they liked O'Neal enough to bring him back another time. But he just feels like a wet blanket to me. And it's just like he doesn't mesh well with the banter between Columbo. And like there's some scenes
I think you're jumping the gun because Columbo doesn't show up yet.
I know. No, I'm just speaking in general.
Oh, okay. I'm like, John, whoa.
No. Yeah, I'm just speaking in general. It's that I just feel like he's just he doesn't have the spark that the nemesis of whatever episode of Columbo we're doing, I feel should have.
You see, John, this is where I'm going to disagree with you slightly, because although I agree that Leslie Nielsen would have been a better choice, I personally think that Patrick O'Neal as Elliot Markham does do an excellent job as the aloof genius architecture who is just looking down on Columbo and thinking that, he's going to get away with this murder because it's so dastardly planned.
Yeah, I see your point. It's just there's something in the performance missing for me, to be quite frank, and it's just there's not enough spark.
That's fair.
And I mean, I don't know what to attribute it to. I don't know if it's Bochco's writing, which is possible. I don't know if it's the fact that Falk has his attention split because he's serving double duty as both director and star. It's a mixed bag for me, Markham, but we can keep going. So Williamson shows up on site to this construction site, and I noticed some ridiculous details about his Cadillac, Anthony.
Please tell, John.
Yeah, on the passenger side, right above the door handle, he's got a gun just like embossed.
Does he really?
Side. Yeah.
Oh, I completely missed that. Holy moly. I'm going to have to double check that.
He has like the most ridiculously Texaned out Cadillac this side of Dallas.
Man.
And I mean the soap opera Dallas, not the city.
Oh, God. Well, his car in general is just crazy, John. Like, even this scene, I'm pretty sure he's either going to impale himself on rebar or just run everybody over, because this Cadillac is just furiously whipping through this construction site.
Yeah, and to give Peter Falk some directorial credit, yeah, this opening sequence between Markham and Williamson at Markham's office, it's very fast paced. It is high speed, energetic. I like it. I'm really here for it.
Oh, absolutely. And you can see Markham as he's talking with his foreman of the construction site as this Cadillac gets just inches ever so closer to where they're at the very top of this construction site. And then Mr. Williamson decides to get out of the car, John. And John, let's tell the loyal listeners what happens in this conversation, because I found it to be intriguing.
Yeah. And this is another moment where I'd like to talk about Peter Falk's framing of the scene, because he has Markham on on the one side of the construction site, and Williamson is coming over to him through a bridge. And the way he positions the camera to capture both of these people in the conversation. I lost my words there, so forgive my rambling. I just really enjoyed how he framed it. But it is a very entertaining scene because Williamson is just pissed the hell off. We learned that he's been out of the country for about 8 weeks, so about 2 months. His wife apparently authorized the construction of Williamson City, which is supposed to cement Bo Williamson's legacy, or for whatever reason, and hired Elliot Markham to design it. And it's supposed to be this vast achievement of architectural design, and is meant to ensure that Bo Williamson's name is remembered for ages to come. And the crux of this argument, Anthony, if I may summarize what both sides of this argument are trying to do, Markham wants to create an everlasting legacy, and Bo Williamson is more concerned about what it will personally cost him.
Yes, absolutely. And John, towards the tail end of this conversation, it gets extremely sinister, because Markham essentially wants him dead, and he just throws it in Bo's face, asking him, well, would you commission me to draw up your burial mural or something to the like of that?
Or like an Egyptian tomb, which is now that I'm thinking about it, makes sense why he's talking about the Egyptian pyramids later on in this episode. Yeah. He wants to. It's a very casual threat.
Yes,
to Williamson.
And Williamson finds it amusing to the point where he's like, "Oh boy, you sure want me dead, don't you, boy?" And then just gives him this. It's not a hard slap, John, but it is just like a boy know your place slap. It's just like a gentle tap on the cheek.
Yeah, it's a very
with such condescension to it.
Yeah, it's a playful slap, but it is, like you said, he's putting him in his place. It's just like you don't mess with me.
Yeah, exactly. And then from here, John, Markham goes straight back to his office and has his secretary attempt to call Mrs. Williamson, who he's been confiding with to get this city built.
Yes, and we, before we to have a quick little flashback to talk about the money issue, Anthony, because that's an important thing to note in this episode. Williamson states that, when Markham makes his very casual threat about designing Bo Williamson's tomb, he states that according to the terms of his will, his money will go into trust, which means it will be walled off from whoever benefits from that trust. His wife, who Markham is working with, will get a yearly stipend out of that. She'll get some money, but it's not enough to do what Markham has planned. It's not enough to build a city. So Markham now is in a bind. He wants Williamson out of the way, but if he does take Williamson out of the way, that means all of the funding for this project, his architectural dream project, goes out the window.
Absolutely, it does, John. And we're seeing this struggle that Markham's having regarding that. As he goes back to his office, talks to his secretary to call Mrs. Williamson to try to straighten everything out. Now, John.
Yes.
The secretary, whose name I'm forgetting, they
don't say it until very later on. I think it's Mrs. Sherman.
Yes, that sounds about right. So we'll continue with that. And essentially, Miss Sherman says that the resort that Mrs. Williamson's staying at doesn't allow contact with guests. And Markham replies with a very intriguing word that I literally quoted because it just made me smile, made me chuckle. He goes, so she's incommunicado. And like this sinister kind of twirl your mustache. And so that's the part where I was like, okay, now I see what you mean by replacing him, because that line just it shot me to pieces.
And you're bringing up something I was hoping we could digest a little bit. One of the frustrations I had with this episode is that it telegraphed a lot of things pretty brazenly. So we're talking about a how do you catch them mystery show. It's like we know these people are going to murder somebody at some point,
right?
And we know how they do it. It's about the catch that is the draw here. But the incommunicado thing and his snidely whiplash nature, it reflects a lot of things that I had issue with, because he does that a lot. Even Columbo does that a lot, with a lot of heavy-handed exposition and very obvious light bulb moments,
right? Absolutely,
which are a lot. We have similar moments in previous episodes, but a couple of them just do it a lot more effectively.
Yes. So after his incommunicado moment, he essentially you can see the aha light bulb moment go off in his nonverbals, which is excellent acting. I give him props for that. And he tells Miss Sherman that, I love you so much, Miss Sherman, I could marry you, or something like that. Something snide and whatever have you. And then Miss Sherman replies with, I needed that. Thank you, sir. And just that part made me laugh. And then that's the end of this particular scene. And we get a jump cut to Bo Williamson at his ranch, pining over his prize horse.
Can I say, his coat is unreal.
It is unreal, John, especially for a Texan.
Because it looks like he's wearing a parka.
Yeah, literally like he is in Alaska, about ready to, go fishing, ice fishing out in the native land.
Yeah, he's in like this ridiculously collared, fur-lined coat, watching this horse go around the track and being very impressed with it because he paid a lot of money for it, I guess. It's not really as important as what happens when Williamson goes to his car, Williamson, and is held up by none other than Elliot Markham, hiding in the back seat, and how he never saw him in that damn seat in broad daylight.
I mean, to be fair, like, it made me reflect, like, how often do I check my back seat before getting into a car? It's very rare. I mean, I'm not always like, okay, this back seat looks good, let me enter. So I could assume a person on his own territory and a person of his position just getting into his own car, not thinking twice about checking the back seat.
And especially a macho man like Bo Williamson is, which, and Columbo File noted this, it's a little surprising that he gives up so easily when when he postures himself as such a tough guy. And it doesn't help that we don't see the killing, so we don't know exactly
how it went down.
Happens. We just know that Markham guides Williamson into some on-site building on Williamson's ranch, and we cut to a very nice POV shot of Williamson's car driving into his estate.
But John,
yes,
as he's doing that, did you find the music to be a certain way?
Why, yes, indeed I did. Because Bo Williamson, when he gets into his car, is listening to very public domain country western music.
I love that, because that's exactly what it was. He just pops on thing. It's like, it just, oh my God, it was amazing.
It might as well have just been saying, I'm going to Alabama to see my uncle and get me some moonshine. Like some stereotypical country western nonsense. And during the POV shot of Williamson's caddy going back into his estate, the music has changed, Anthony.
Ooh, to what, John?
Classical.
Classical, you say?
It is very much classical. It is. We find that Elliot Markham is driving the Cadillac and is listening to some classical music, Anthony. And he's going into the Williamson house to gather up the suitcase that Bo Williamson hastily decided not to unpack, and take the essentials that it would need to, that it would clearly show that somebody, in this case Williamson, has left the country again. And by the way, that classical music that's playing is the second movement of Brahms' Second Piano Concerto, which comes up, that specific tune repeats over and over as people listen to classical music in this episode.
Interesting. I had not put that down.
That is a little bit of IMDb trivia. I will say that the Williamson house is very rustic and fits a Texan.
Yeah, I agree to that, John.
But that is also based off of stereotypes on Texans.
Yes, 100%. But John, we move away from our good old boy Texan to the next day, where it's opening day at the construction site.
The dedication ceremony. And this is about 12, 13 minutes in, and the good lieutenant has made his arrival. Following a very interesting conversation with a security guard.
I honestly chalk that down to this could have been just cut.
Like you could have had Columbo just walking in and standing at the back of, all these people just doing this dedication. So after this very weird conversation with a security guard, Columbo kind of abruptly just interrupts Markham being, in my notes, a wet, boring noodle, because he's just talking about pricing and architecture.
Yes, but John, one thing I did note in his boring noodle way is that essentially this complex he's talking about, what he wants it to be, sounds kind of akin to what like the Google headquarters looks like nowadays. Essentially a place, a home within an office setting where there's lots of places for these people to get their work done, but there's lots of free reign for them to still do exercise and all of this other stuff. And I literally put down that it sounds a lot like Google headquarters as he was explaining this Williamson City complex.
Yeah, he described it as living cocoons in one sense. And I also have a note, what a pretentious schmuck this guy is.
Yeah, I mean, you can't get past that either way.
Because let's be honest, a mentality like that where your workplace is also like home is just an excuse to keep your workers working.
Yes, 100%. 100%.
Also, if I may note, Peter Falk's entrance here is the greatest BDE swagger I've seen in a while.
Do tell.
He's just walking in with confidence, man, and I'm here for it. It's just like, yeah, I'm the lieutenant. I'm here because I got a reason to be here, and you guys aren't going to tell me otherwise. I got a thing to do. I gotta find somebody, and I gotta find Mrs. Williamson.
Yes, John, because his office received a call from a Mrs. Williamson for some strange reason, John.
Yes, that particular reason is that Mrs. Williamson said that her husband is missing. Her husband is missing, possibly dead. And we find Mrs. Williamson, a young Jennifer Williamson, who says, I didn't make a phone call. She's very much the younger trophy wife.
Oh, absolutely. 100%.
And if I could talk about Miss Austin's performance here, it's a little bit dry.
I would say she falls kind of flat for me.
Yeah.
If I'm talking about low points in this episode. Now, again, I don't want to say that's her in particular. It could have been the writing. But again, she's just supposed to be a trophy wife, a trophy partner, essentially. And so I really wasn't expecting much from her to begin with, to be fair. But she really just falls flat for me.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, she's meant to be an exposition machine.
Yes, that's a great way of putting it.
Yeah, and I also have a couple notes because I felt like I definitely feel like there's room for some kind of subplot where Markham is seducing her.
Yes, that was hinted at throughout this entire episode, and I'm curious as to why they didn't just throw that in there entirely and just let it to this overtone of that being the case.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple scenes throughout that heavily imply that situation is in existence, considering the fact that they moved forward on a substantial city project without her husband's permission. Would lead me to believe that maybe she had something to do with it, but she seems to genuinely care about her husband.
She does. I'll give her that. She does genuinely, to a point, care about her husband.
She seems to just dismiss a lot of the concerns regarding him that get brought up by the first wife that she mentions, Mrs. Williamson, who did call the police. We will get to
Goldie Williamson apparently is the one who made the call, John.
Yeah, and before we get to Goldie, I'd like to just talk about the conversation Columbo has with Markham and Jennifer Williamson. We learn how Mr. Markham and the Williamsons got connected, Anthony. Apparently he designed their summer house.
Why, yes, he did. And apparently he just did such an excellent job, John, that she, meaning Jennifer Williamson, decided to hire him on to do this grandiose thing.
I mean, maybe it has nothing to do with the way how he brings sausage to the house.
Yes, I mean, that's one of the few ways they hinted towards an affair between the two of them, but never outright or played that subplot.
Now, I really appreciate Goldie Williamson's introduction here, Anthony, because
I loved her entirely.
Yeah, I loved her without a shadow of a doubt. She was just an electric persona. But I love the smash cut between Jennifer Williamson saying there's nothing to be concerned about to Goldie immediately contradicting her and being just this bombshell dynamo person in comparison to Jennifer.
Essentially it was the first younger Mrs. Williamson saying, like, he's alive, there's nothing to worry about, and directly smash cuts into Goldie Williamson saying, oh, there's absolutely something to worry about, he's dead. And I credit this, and again, I'm not saying Peter Falk did the editing, but it was a great direction to take it in. I very much enjoyed this smash transition.
Yeah, it's a brilliant way to immediately juxtapose these two women, at least in terms of their personality. So Columbo is talking to Goldie while she's in the midst of getting a massage in what I presume is a penthouse that she lives in. I don't really know. We learned that Goldie always gets a phone call from Beau before he leaves the country. They divorced a long time ago. She always gets regular alimony, but she also implies that they are friends with benefits.
Yeah, so she tells Columbo that they've been together 22 years and that he divorced her because he was trying to get something younger and trying to get a fountain of youth, if you will. So he married her for eternal youth, but he still has Goldie for everything else.
Yeah. Also, she has a quirk in her conversations with Columbo.
Oh, absolutely. I love the hell out of it, man. She calls the Columbo lover.
I'm just
time.
like, okay, why is she calling him that? And two, I don't even know if Columbo's married. I know he always refers to a wife, but Columbo, go for it.
Oh,
dude.
like that's a green light there, buddy, if at all. And boy, howdy. All. And it amplifies because she's done with the massage, and we have this cute interaction with Miko, the massage therapist, telling Columbo-san that, something in Japanese and giving her a bow.
The longest Japanese goodbye I've ever seen. Yes. And I don't know why she had to say that much in Japanese.
Yes, but essentially, Columbo obviously is just like smiling, grin, ear to ear of a grin, bows back and says, sayonara, sayonara. Like he throws an Italian out at the end of the Japanese word. It just made me laugh, made me chuckle. And it's at this point where Goldie asks Columbo to turn around, and Columbo's flustered because she is naked. She was getting a massage naked. And then she
wrapped in like a towel or a sheet.
Or in a sheet or something like that. And she says, Columbo turns around and is very modest and said, well, since I'm standing here practically naked, Columbo, we better be friends. And all my friends call me Goldie.
There's also a line that she says immediately before that when she gestures to Columbo, turn around. I don't want to corrupt you.
Oh, I love the flirtatiousness between those two.
She's honestly, Janis Paige is such a tremendous performer in this scene, and she honestly just sells it from jump. And I buy this woman in her fiery nature. I just buy it.
Yeah, 100%.
We also get a phone call like we usually do.
Yeah, and the trope of Columbo always receives a phone call at somebody else's house, which I love, and it just makes me laugh.
And it's also just how it was done back then.
Yeah, true enough. But so Columbo gets a call that they found Bo Williams' car at the local airport.
That's right.
I'm assuming LAX.
Yeah, I don't know if LAX was built by then, if not, but yeah, I don't know my LA history, but it's besides the point. Anthony, go on.
So, John, Columbo goes to the car, and there's a bunch of officers looking bored out of their minds as Columbo is just sitting there listening to tape after tape after tape of just country western generic music.
Yeah, he's listening to cassette tapes that Bo Williamson seems to have by the bushel in his car. And Columbo notices something about the car radio, Anthony.
Yes, John. He pops the tape out, instantly goes to the radio, and on the radio is classical music.
And Columbo has a aha head slap moment just listening to classical music, and he knows that something is wrong in this car because why is this radio on classical music when all the cassette tapes in this car, and cassette tapes, kids, are what people used to listen to music on. They were already a dead thing when Anthony and I were children, but they were still around.
No, that's unfair, John, because they were well into close to our teens. I made my wife a mixtape on a cassette tape.
Get out of here.
I swear to God. It was an early, I think, gift that I made of her of a bunch of just lovey-dovey, cheesy music.
She better still have that.
Probably not, because who has a stereo that plays cassettes anymore, John?
I mean, I'm just talking about the sentimental value.
Well, it's always there. It's always going to be there.
So I called this Peter Falk's beautiful mind moment.
What?
Because, yeah, he just he sees all the puzzle pieces, and it's just like, oh, I see it. I have a suspect now.
You're making Columbo out to be the guy. I can't remember, but it's the meme of the board where it's the red string attached to all of these thumbtacks.
Yeah, from It's Always Sunny.
Yeah,
It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia.
Yes,
the Charlie Day thing.
Yes.
That's exactly what I'm doing. That is absolutely what I'm doing.
Okay, I'll follow you on that crazy train.
Yeah, it's just like this obvious aha moment, and I don't like the obvious aha moments for Columbo. I prefer where it's it just comes up more naturally.
Right. And speaking of things that come up naturally, Columbo naturally goes back to Goldie's house and finds Goldie and Jennifer Williamson both just having a chat.
I think he invited them there to talk about what happened, and this is another scene where the exposition gets really heavy-handed, and the exposition machine of Jennifer Williamson goes to work. So we learned that Bo Williamson's passport is gone, which means that it implies that he's possibly out of the U.S. He's gone abroad, which he want to do. He's a very established businessman who does things across the globe. Columbo brings up the fact that he only listens to country music, and both of the women confirm that is the only thing he listens to, no matter what.
He also asked, though, John, just to be on the safe side, if the newer, younger Mrs. Williamson ever drives the car.
Which she does not. They have their own separate cars. And I would imagine a burly man like this stereotypical Texan that we're presented with as Bo Williamson would not let anybody drive his car but himself.
Yes, I would 100% agree with that, John. But also, we find out, John, through this exposition machine, as you so lovingly refer to her as, that Bo Williams had a heart problem, and he had to schedule with this cardiologist literally like the day after he was supposedly, quote-unquote, taking off out of the country.
Yeah, he has a doctor appointment with his heart specialist because he has a pacemaker. He has a bad ticker. And Goldie said, who has been with this man probably through that incident, and that is not something easy to deal with. I will say that through personal experience. She is absolutely right. He would not take a heart doctor visit lightly. He would be, if he had that scheduled, he would have been following up on it. He would not just dump it and leave for whatever business trip he had.
But John, speaking of dumping and leaving, we were dumped with some more exposition of that Mr. Markham and Bo apparently talked before Bo took off.
Yeah, and the heaviest handed setup of Columbo just, Williamson City, what's that?
And then literally, like, you can hear the background music go ba-dum, as the scene is starting to end and it fades to black because of TV cutting it. That would be commercial time.
Yeah, and Columbo sets up Jennifer to explain what Williamson City is, and that, like you said, Anthony, Bo and Elliot Markham did speak, and apparently Bo Williamson loved the idea of Williamson City once it got explained to him.
Because a very fiery person who's very close and tight-wit about his money, if he just has an explanation of, yes, I need all of your money to build this extravagant art piece, he'd just calm exactly right down.
Yeah, sounds reasonable.
Sounds very reasonable.
Or is it?
But John, speaking of things that are reasonable, I think it's very reasonable of us to believe that we're about to get into Act 2. So, John, we transition to Act number 2 with Columbo going to Markham's office with Markham not there.
Yeah, it is late in the evening. It is probably post 5 o'clock, and the office is about to close. And Columbo uses his badge to get into the office and talk with Markham's secretary, Miss Sherman, where we learn that Markham likes classical music. He's got a very nice office, very open, huge office. And Columbo also notices that the Williamson City models that is, the mock-up of what this planned city is going to look like, it's got some damage. And Mrs. Sherman lets Columbo know, oh, wait, Bo Williamson was not happy about learning of Williamson City.
Not at all, John. And then we also find out, again, you already mentioned it, but after he finds out about the smashing, Columbo starts playing some of the records that Markham has of this classical music. And I love this particular scene where Columbo's like slightly kind of dancing, acting as a faux conductor, because he essentially, what I equated this to is he's like, at that point, he's dancing, celebrating the fact that he knows he has his man.
He has his man. He just needs to find a way to nail him to a wall. And he will nail him to a wall at this university lecture that Mrs. Sherman tells Columbo Mr. Markham is giving at the local university. So he's teaching a night class, and he's talking about Egyptian architecture, specifically pyramids, and how the pharaohs would bury their workers and some of their favorite people inside the pyramid with them when the pharaohs died.
Could it be foreshadowing?
Heavy-handed foreshadowing? Yes.
100% heavy-handed. Although it was still, I appreciated the foreshadowing. I appreciated all of that. But again, this is, I believe, the second instance, because we already had this at the Barrett where Bo Williamson and Markham talk about,
designing a tomb.
Yeah. So again, if they cut that first part out, it only spoke to this one, that would be a nice bit of foreshadowing, and I would appreciate that.
I also just think that, I don't know, this scene just feels inherently funny to me, because it's just, they're both dodging the obvious issue when Columbo is conversing with Markham and is just saying, architecture. It's funny you mentioned, burying people inside structures. That would be a hell of a crime, wouldn't it? Yeah, Columbo. Sure that would be, if I had to kill somebody, I'll be sure to remember that. Yeah. This is why I bring up Leslie Nielsen, because I felt like somebody who had better chemistry with Peter Falk and could be a better straight man would sell this scene a little bit better.
Yeah, because Markham essentially said that at first, because again, at this point, Columbo brings up that, I saw your model was smashed in your office. And then Markham goes into his weak sauce explanation that Bo was mad, but when Markham explained the plans to him, he was immediately satisfied with the answer. And again, then Columbo goes into the car, but no record of Bo on any sort of outgoing flights. And Markham's still trying to deflect on that.
Yeah, he does say that they did go without Bo's approval, which he takes full blame for. He's just like, yeah, no, that was probably wrong. That was probably undiplomatic of us. And per your comment about not seeing Williamson on any flights, Markham also alludes to the possibility that maybe he flew under an alias. He's a well-known guy. Maybe he didn't want people to know where he was going.
And I'm sitting there and it's like, dude, if you're really trying to throw any, anything off of you to say, hey, I didn't do this murder, you wouldn't give a weak sauce explanation there. You'd be like, I couldn't tell you, man. Like, I don't know the guy that well. I couldn't tell you why he wasn't on any flight. Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's just the nature of the show needs to have the tete-a-tete moment between Columbo and the murderer. But
yes. And speaking of tete-a-tete, they get tete-a-tete in this where Columbo starts bringing up the classical music on the radio, and as he starts to gently squeeze Markham.
I wouldn't say it's gentle. It's a very hard squeeze.
Yeah, fair enough. That is fair enough. And then, John, we get more shoe polish as Columbo goes back to the construction site. And
a lot of shoe leather. And then Columbo starts to talk to the foreman about piles, John. Yeah, he gets an explanation. And I would refer just back to the episode to get an explanation on how building piles work, because I honestly don't have the patience to explain.
But essentially what I did write out of this, because I'm in the same boat as you, John, is that the foreman said that he could tell Columbo where each pile was put down as far as date and time to like the minute. So very precise records as far as this.
And to who worked on it. So there is a way to figure out who and what was done at these piles on their respective days. The construction foreman also reveals to Columbo that Williamson was not a happy camper, and the narrative that Markham was able to calm him down I don't think they bring it up again after this, but it is effectively quashed at this point. There is holes in it the size of the Titanic.
Yeah, exactly. But John, one thing that was beautifully talked about that was not quashed was my humor at the next scene where Columbo goes to the heart specialist and gets a free checkup out of the goodness of this doctor's heart.
Yeah, I just had a comment. It's like, why would a doctor give somebody a free exam?
I think this is just supposed to be some vaudevillian humor with Columbo's the straight man, the doctor as the overachiever, the over the moon character. It was funny. There was talking about smoking, and Columbo shouldn't smoke anymore, so it was like comical.
A lot of the point of the scene with Williamson's heart doctor is just to establish that Williamson's heart condition was very particular, and he would not have been reckless about it. He would have shown up. So
and he wouldn't have trusted any other specialist overseas or even in state to do this to do any sort of surgery or checkup. He would only trust this one particular doctor.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, Bo Williamson, and I think they imply that this is part of him being a Texan, but I just think this is just the nature of how that particular man is built. He's very particular about his habits. He's very particular about the things that he chooses to do. And once he feels comfortable with somebody, he will stick with that. Change is not a thing in Bo Williamson's vocabulary.
Would you say that Bo Williamson sticks to his guns?
Oh, Jesus Christ, file that.
I will not file that.
Nah, you shouldn't, because that was actually pretty good. Columbo meets Goldie again at this office.
Yes, because she went to the same doctor's office to see if Bo would show up.
Because she has the same amount of concern that Columbo has. It doesn't make sense that somebody who knows how severe his heart condition is would just abandon a doctor appointment like this.
But one thing I want to add about this particular meetup with Goldie is a little bit on the defensive, telling Columbo that, like, what do you need? You need a body to actually, I'm telling you, because she is at this point at her wit's end. She is telling Columbo that there is something wrong here and you're just lollygagging.
It's funny you mentioned body, Anthony, because
Why is that, John?
Because I think the next scene makes an important discovery that might involve a body.
Yes, but John, before a body's discovered, just, it's Markham with his good old friend Jennifer Williamson playing some tennis in a oddly suit that you don't play tennis in ever.
I mean, who, her or him?
Him, John, him. Did you see he's like wearing a long sleeve? Like, I can't even call it a suit.
It's like he's wearing like a jogging outfit, and she is in the skimpiest tennis outfit you can imagine.
Yeah, but John, he's almost in a parka himself playing tennis. Like, it just doesn't make any sense.
Like, I don't like the relationship between the two of them don't make sense to me, and I feel like there's something missing, and it's this obvious subplot of a seduction romance between Jennifer Williamson and Elliot Markham.
Yeah, obviously, again, if that was already established, this scene can maybe make a little bit more sense to me. But again, it was just two best friends playing tennis.
As you're wont to do. I mean, I'm just expecting Johnny Carson to be right next door playing tennis too.
Yeah, because I always, when I hire an architect, I always play tennis with him.
Yeah. So I still, there's nothing to maintain our theory that there is some kind of subplot. It would make this episode better, I think.
Yeah, and it's, again, you're just talking like a 3-minute throwaway line that they're having an affair or something.
Or just bring her in on the killing.
Even at then, like, I'm okay with her not being brought in, but just have a line where they were having an affair or something like that.
Or something like that, and then maybe even just set it up so that she can be, put under the lamp to be identified, and you get some good tension there because she's just like, feeling guilty about cheating on her husband, but really doesn't know what happened to him.
Yeah, exactly. Having a position actually mean something and not just be dropped.
Yeah. So during their tennis match, they lose all their balls because tennis balls, not other kind of balls. So Jennifer goes to get one of their smacked balls to continue their tennis match, and she discovers a bloody hat, Anthony, and that bloody hat is one of Bo Williamson's hats.
Why, yes, it is. And you can see, because hear a shrill shriek of Jennifer yelling, and then Mr. Markham runs over, sees the hat, and is instantly perplexed.
He is very surprised, and it is not something that he expected. So we learned that it's not something Elliot Markham had planned. He was not going to set up the possibility of maybe Bo Williamson was killed.
Yeah, and so Columbo arrives at the scene, and you see like a genuine shocked and puzzled interaction of Mr. Markham and Columbo as Markham literally is just genuine saying, like, I have no idea how this happened. I got no clue. They're both drinking. Well, he's drinking some alcohol.
He offers to Columbo, and Columbo declines because he's still on the job. He's still on the job.
Absolutely. That's how you know Columbo's still on the job.
Exactly.
So, John, the scene instantly jumps to Markham being.
There's something that you almost left out, Anthony, and it's what Jennifer Williamson is doing for Columbo in the Williamson house. Columbo asks for Jennifer to find her husband's old army dog tags, because in some cases, on military dog tags, the soldier's blood type is listed in the event that they need a blood transfusion.
I completely missed that, John.
Yeah. It's an important detail for a little bit later on, but we learned that Bo Williamson is B positive, and the blood that is on the hat is B positive. So it could be Bo Williamson's blood.
That's where it confuses me, John, because there's no mention of the dog tags when Columbo finds out he's B positive. He says he got the original marriage license between Goldie and him, which had his blood type on that original marriage license, to which that's how he find out that Bo was B positive, as well as Goldie being B positive.
I think that I think it was just more, and we could talk about what happens when they go to Goldie's.
Sure. Yeah, I know I'm jumping the gun a little bit, but I'm just on the moment here.
Yeah, my memory's a little fuzzy on it. It's like, I think they don't mention the dog tags, but I think at that point it's just established between us and Columbo that, okay, Williamson's blood type is B positive. If there's any other documentation we know that says that he's B positive, we know it's backed up.
Okay. Regardless.
Yes.
We jump to Markham essentially either the next day is what I gathered. Back in his office, being in a foul mood, just playing some angry emo classical music as he's
like you're wont to do when you're grumpy. You just play Beethoven.
Yeah, and so he is like just trying to figure out a plan. He's not happy with life. There's a random student showing up, or a random architecture showing up to the office, talking with the secretary, just so we can establish that he's in a bad mood.
I guess I feel like it's like one of his associates or something, but he's just that was weird. But Markham
weird, John.
Yes, Anthony. What else is weird?
Is that Markham all of a sudden decides to get Jennifer on the horn and asks to see Bo's will.
That's right. He called her up on the Amici, see?
And it's weird that in architecture, all of a sudden, call back. It was a call back to an earlier episode of Columbo. And it's weird, John, that all of a sudden, this architect is doing police work and goes and interrogates Goldie at Goldie's estate.
Yeah, and it's he is in so many words accusing her of wanting to kill her husband, because then that would mean she no longer has to rely on alimony checks. She gets the quarter of the Williamson estate that she is due under the terms of his will. She'll get a quarter of the estate, and 25%, and the rest will go into trust and will be untouchable by either Goldie or Jennifer Williamson. And Jennifer Williamson will get a share out of the trust.
Yep. And then as Markham's confronting Goldie, he threatens to call Columbo over, and Columbo just so happens to pop in the scene.
It's just like, oh, excuse me. I just happen to be here.
Yes, exactly.
It was heavy-handed again.
Yeah, it really was. But in this heavy-handedness, we find out that Columbo talked to Miko, who, through so many words, because she didn't really speak much English and he didn't really speak much Japanese, that he finds out that Goldie's the one who planted the hats, and that Goldie had a cut on the back of her leg.
Yes.
Which indicates that, and he throws down that she's also B positive, and also indicates that he knows that she is the one who planted the hat, and that cat comes out of the bag.
Yeah, Goldie admits that she took one of the hats that Bo had left with her. She had 3 hats. She now has 2. She planted the hat with blood in order to get people more concerned and active in looking for Bo Williamson, because she felt like the investigation was not going the way she would want it. Columbo and Markham essentially just give her a gentle verbal slap on the wrist, like, you did a bad thing, but we're not gonna do anything bad, right, and get you involved with the legal system, because in the end of the day, you didn't really falsify evidence. You just planted something in order to get a result.
Either way, I still think it wouldn't fly in today's society, but
probably not. It's a little sketchy. Also sketchy is the fact that Columbo wants to see the will of Bo Williamson, and I couldn't find anything otherwise, but I'm pretty sure that's a private legal document, and he would need a warrant for that.
Yeah, and essentially he's even curious to see as to how Markham got this will, which again leads to our subplot of them having an affair, Jennifer and Markham.
Yeah, and it's just like the fact that isn't something that's in this episode again, I think flummoxes a lot of what this episode is trying to do. Now, from Goldie's place, we go back to the construction site, and Columbo again talking with the site foreman Carl, asking about how the building piles are constructed again. And again, I will defer you all to the episode. If you're interested in that, just listen to the episode. I hope it's accurate. But I don't think Anthony and I are going to waste much time explaining how building piles work, because honestly,
not at all.
I don't really care.
Yeah, pretty much.
It's the short version is that they excavate, get it ready to dump a lot of cement, then dump a lot of cement, and then use it to support the building.
And speaking of things to support things, Markham goes to support this plot and tells Columbo and is egging Columbo on, essentially, John, to dig up the pile D3.
Yeah,
because that's the one that was planted where the day that Bo Williamson went missing.
Yeah, it's like, go do it. Go on. Just satisfy your curiosity. Go on. Dig up D3. Do it.
Columbo, if I hypothetically speaking was the murderer, that's what I would do. I would plant his body there.
It's and Columbo, is in a predicament right now. He has no body. He has no proof. Without either of those, he can't show that a murder has actually been committed. And Columbo brings up something that he discussed with his brother-in-law, an attorney, about the Williamson will. That if Williamson dies, we've explained this before, but I will explain it again. If Williamson dies, Jennifer won't get anything substantial. The estate goes into trust. It's out of her hand. She's not going to be able to touch it. She gets the interest. So as the money sits in that account, it'll accrue interest. Whatever interest that is Jennifer's. But it's not enough to build a city, Anthony.
Not at all, John.
But if Bo Williamson is still missing, is considered missing, if he's not considered dead, if he's just missing, legally, he's still not dead. The will's not able to be executed. So
that's the point.
And this is just from Columbo's mouth. I don't know how accurate this is. I kind of get the feeling it might not be, but I mean, you have to legally declare Williamson dead, and that would require a specific amount of time to occur first before that could even happen. But according to Columbo, so long as Bo Williamson is missing, the money stays out of trust and is still accessible by Jennifer Williamson.
Yeah, and it got me thinking, John, it's like what you mentioned, there has to be a specific amount of time to where Bo Williamson is now could be considered legally dead. So how long was he planning on having quote unquote Bo Williamson missing? Because this construction site, it's not like it's going to take a week to build. This is going to take probably years. So
yeah, it's a whole city.
Yeah, it's a
whole city.
So again, I'll go into that a little bit in my final thoughts, John, if you please remind me of that if I didn't already put that down in my notes. But so essentially Markham needed Bo alive. And in order to dig up that pile, John, Columbo says he needs to come up with something concrete.
The line is so bad, but it's honestly still good.
And what else is good, John, is the end of this act to the beginning of next act as Columbo officially tries to get something more concrete. So, John, Columbo
Yes, Anthony.
goes to a government building to get a building permit to see what it would require to dig up a pile.
This has to be the most shoe leather moment in this show so far.
It does, John, but you know what? It works. Like, I really enjoyed this scene. I laughed at this scene.
Anthony, describe for our listeners what is happening as Columbo is at this building and structures office.
So essentially, Columbo shows up to this office needing to
Building and safety, I should say.
building and safety office needing to talk to somebody of what it would require to rip up a pile. But upon getting to this office, as one does since it's a government building, he sees that there's a line already forming to this office, and he cannot fathom that there is literally like 30 people in this line all needing to talk to this one person about a building permit.
And you know, it's literally, I think, if you want to equate it to a more modern example, I think it's the DMV scene in Zootopia with the sloths.
Yes.
This is that moment for Columbo.
And Columbo essentially can't believe it. Peter Falk's nonverbals and over dramatizing, again, vaudevillian, just kind of like slapping his head, going like, oh, geez, oh, God. Like, what's going on here? And Columbo essentially gets the red tape run around and says he has to go to another building to get a different format, to get a different certificate, so then he can go back to this building permit office. And he gets this certain paperwork. He goes back, and it's completely empty. And he starts talking to the guy. And he goes, yeah, come back in an hour. It's my lunch hour. And John, I want to present to you a fun fact.
Yes.
About this as I'm watching this. I'm laughing. And my wife, who's watching it with me, turns to me and says, this is why people commit homicide.
Oh, that's a beautiful moment. That is one beautiful moment. Anthony, if I may add a joke that I made for myself, I felt like the building and safety guy in my head is related somehow to Mr. Feeney from Boy Meets World.
Oh boy, if he's not, he definitely looks like it.
Like they look like either distant cousins or, you know, father and son for all I know, or brothers. I don't know. He just looks like the guy who played Mr. Feeney.
Oh, absolutely. 100%. But John, we find out that in order to rip up this pile, it's going to take a considerable amount of money. It's going to take the mayor's approval, all of this other red tape. But Columbo goes the extra mile just to get it. And so we move on to the construction scene once again, because we did not get enough construction site scenery as of yet in this episode.
Or construction worker flab.
As we go and the digging up of the pile begins.
Yeah, and Columbo looks, throughout this whole scene, he looks unsure of a lot of things, whether or not this is the right avenue. And Markham seems more annoyed, but I think in his conversations with Columbo, he comes across more as politely smug, I guess. It's like this is all going according to what he wanted Columbo to do, so he's proud about it.
Yeah, essentially, Columbo fell into his trap. And we find out that there's a lot of press involved there, and that Markham's the one who called the press.
Which I still don't get why. Like, why would they even care? But
I think it's just the way I had it in my head to make sense is that he called the press to have them film about how this is a waste of taxpayer dollars, to put pressure from the mayor's office to the police office, the police chief, to put pressure to Columbo to say, hey, get off of this dude. You're wasting all this time and money, because that's what ultimately we find is that there's no body in this pile.
Right. We also get Goldie here.
Yes, we do, John. And
yes, we do. What happens here, Anthony?
Oh, she goes, well, I owe you a drink there, lover. Let's go get one.
And Columbo says, thank you, but, get one for the both of us. And she doesn't plant a big wet one, but she does plant a nice kiss on Columbo.
Oh, it's a lingering kiss on Columbo, too. It's like, hey, if you ever change your mind, you know where my penthouse is.
We're you're a friend of mine, Columbo, so give me a call.
Yeah, buddy. He's about to find there's some Goldie up in them hills.
She's going to be yelling for Prospector soon. An Italian one.
Right. But, John, one thing I did want to add to the negative is that I feel like this digging up of the pile scene could have been a lot shorter. It could have been a lot tighter.
I agree. There's one shot of a crane lifting nothing.
Yeah.
Well, it's supposed to be lifting the pile out so that they can look inside to see if there's a body. As the crane lifts up, there's nothing at the end of the crane.
Yeah, it's just, it could have been cut a lot. And again, I don't know if this was just added to pad time because it was the 1970s made-for-TV moment.
And referring back to some of the difficulties Peter Falk had later on in reshoots, maybe it was just the nature of the construction site had changed so much that they couldn't use it in the way that they needed to anymore. And maybe that's why we get shots like the crane lifting nothing.
Perhaps. But ultimately, John, they find nothing in the pile. Markham's gloating that, of course, there's nothing in this pile. And then, like you said, the aforementioned scene with Goldie and Columbo.
Yeah, and Markham leaves. Everybody leaves. They call it a night. Markham goes back to Williamson's ranch, where we find out that's where the body's been this whole time. And fun fact, Anthony.
Yes.
Fun fact. This car that Elliot Markham is driving, did this car look familiar to you, Anthony?
Perhaps, but it was dark in the scene.
Well, you see that car earlier on when Columbo towards the end of Act 2, where Columbo is talking with Markham about finding something concrete. You get a better look at that car. That car is the same car that Jack Cassidy drove in Murder by the Book, Anthony.
Oh my God! Of course it is.
And another fun thing, and I'll get to it in a moment. I appreciate that it's mostly silent here. And to be honest, we haven't really talked about Gil Malay's score here. To be frank, there's not really much to it this time.
There's nothing to score. Honestly,
No.
It was the generic country western, and it was the classical generic music. So
Yeah.
I mean, there really wasn't much other music.
And even the original stuff that's specific for this episode, it just doesn't really sit, particularly well, at least in a memorable kind of way. But as Markham is getting this car, or the body into the trunk of the car, it is mostly silent, which I appreciate. It follows kind of what Spielberg did very early on in Murder by the Book, where some of the scenes are just pure silence and you're just seeing people do stuff. But it's not completely silent. It's mostly silent. You still hear some stuff.
Sure.
And then one of Markham's tires blow out, Anthony.
Yeah, again, John, I mentioned how this could have been tighter in many places. As I previously mentioned, tighter the construction scene. I felt as though this scene really didn't have to happen. It was just added drama to add drama.
There's a good reason for that, Anthony, because this wasn't designed for this script.
Really?
This scene was originally written by Stephen Bochco for Murder by the Book.
That would make a lot more sense to have it in that episode.
because what does Jack Cassidy do with his writing partner's body? Stuffs it in a trunk.
Stuffs in the trunk. Yeah, that would have fit way better there in that particular Columbo episode.
But here I think it works all right. I feel like Bochco did recover a pretty decent scene, because the car tire blows out. Markham pulls over, and a motorcycle cop shows up, and talks to him about, conveniently shows up, and Markham thinks nothing of it. It's just like, oh crap, bike cop. And there's really great tension here.
A lot of tension. I'll give it that. It's great tension. And one thing I've written down is that the officer essentially says, hey, you did a great job driving, you're safe, and offers to help him fix the spare. And I added, John, the one time a police officer actually offers to help to do some manual labor, it's where you don't want him to see the body in the trunk.
Yeah, and I mean that's part of what the tension's supposed to be, but it's like Markham does everything this short of telling the guy to go kick rocks to not get him to change the spare tire.
Yeah,
eventually
Markham comes up with an excuse of, there's no air in the spare, and the officer's like, all right, cool, see you later, and just drives.
I'll call a tow truck, bye.
Yeah, so fine, fair enough. Again, tension was great, but not needed. And we get to Markham finally getting his spare, putting it on the car, and getting construction site, to which immediately Columbo shows up and catches him in the act.
It's a great gotcha moment.
It is quite a great gotcha moment.
The construction site lights come on. This is like the one time I feel like Malay's score is really, really good, because the music swell, right when he's about to dump the body to the spotlight reveal, and then Columbo walking up with the rest of the police members. It's all great. And Columbo does his breakdown. It's just like, you wanted me to open this pile up because you wanted me to look like a fool. Nobody would think to search a place that's already been searched, and you would have had the perfect grave, and nobody would have. It's an Egyptian tomb. Yep. Nobody would have opened it for 100 years.
And the only thing that got him was that Carnegie Hall, John, in Nashville, they don't mix.
They don't mix at all.
But one thing that does mix, John, is...
What's that, Anthony?
Our final thoughts for this episode, I'd like to think, mix extremely well.
Let's go see if we have just one more thing to talk about, Anthony. Excuse me, just one more thing. So, just one more thing, Anthony. It's time for final thoughts. What you got for me?
John, overall, I think Markham was okay. He wasn't the best. He wasn't the worst we've seen. And honestly, the plan of this murder was pretty perfect. I will give him that.
Yeah, I will. I'm agreeing with that assessment. I mean, it's no dead weight, to be honest, but he's kind of blah, and he's good in parts. And I just wish that I needed more fire between him and Columbo. And yes, maybe it's just the nature of Peter Falk being distracted by having to serve double duty here. And I mentioned that before, but it's just, there's not enough between the two of them that make it feel like there is a proper dance like we've gotten before.
Yeah, no, 100%, John. And speaking of things we've talked about in previous episodes that falls into this, is that I believe this could have been trimmed up pretty nice and proper. It could have been a lot tighter. Not that it's really bad, like dead weight, but it just could have been trimmed up and trimmed some of the fat a little bit. But it flowed pretty well.
It has a pretty stellar opening, I would say. And then the final parts of the third act, towards the end of the episode, with the tearing up of the building pile and the reclaiming of the body, and then the gotcha moment. That's all really good, but there's a lot of stuff in between where it's just a little too much shoe leather for me. I love Goldie, Janis Paige.
That was my last final point, John, is that
Janis is phenomenal.
Paige, phenomenal. Honestly, I I can't remember if she's in any other future Columbo episodes, but I really wish she was.
Unfortunately, no. This is all we get with Janis Paige and with Goldie. I hope Columbo does pick her up on that drink. I will say that Forrest Tucker, as limited as we get with him, and as much of a stereotype as he's playing, I honestly would have liked to have seen him come back again.
He sells it. Like, I'll give him, like,
yeah.
he got the part of, hey, you're a generic Texan, a oil tycoon Texan, and he goes, all right, sold, got it.
Yeah, I can do that. Yeah. I can do that pretty quick and to the point, and I'll get the job done.
But Pamela Austin, John. Pamela Austin is Jennifer again. We made the joke, exposition machine. Could have been better, but you know what? She served the purpose of what she served. If we had this subplot that we've hinted at and talked about of an affair, and maybe give her a little bit more scenery to chew, maybe we could have had something more developed. Maybe she could have at least reached some sort of level of Janis Paige in this, but ultimately it just falls a little flat for me.
Yeah, unfortunately, she's very monotone. She's very just generic, you know, and there's so many women of that period were just kind of the same kind of monotone performance, blonde, white. It's just like, I agree. If the part had been given more meat, and there is bone to put meat on, you know, we talked about it plenty of times between how she interacts with Markham. There's something there that must have gotten cut. Or just, you know, the thought was there, but nobody decided to pick up on it. I don't know, but it's just it's the style of her performance. It just doesn't work. And another thing I think you might agree is that this episode is a little too heavy-handed and a little too repetitive in how it, you know, sets up the discovery of the clues and you know, the red herrings and all of this other stuff. It's just, it doesn't seem subtle. It doesn't seem crafted. It's all just like beating you over the head with a hammer. Yeah,
there's a little subtlety between Markham and Columbo. But again, like I said, it's not enough to really save or to even balance out the heavy-handedness of that. But overall, John, I'd like to think it was a solid episode. I'd like to think that it was a lot better than some of the previous ones, such as Dead Weight. And John, one thing I'd also like to say as we end our episode tonight is please let our loyal listeners hear you in this episode as only you can.
Thank you very much, Anthony. Good listeners, you have been a part of another file in the Columbo Files. I am one half of your co-hosts, John Soares. The dulcet tones of laughter that you are hearing are my co-host, the man, the myth, the booty, the legend himself, Antonicus Gluteus Maximus IV, Anthony to his friends. And on behalf of all of us here at the Ludic Lounge, I'd just like to say thank you. Thank you very much. Hi, this is Peter Falk, and you've been listening to an episode of the Columbo Files, hosted by the Ludic Lounge. And just one more thing. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at Ludic Lounge, Anthony at RojoLoco44, and John at just_John_0891. Or feel free to email us at theludiclounge@gmail.com.